Hello everyone, and today we're going to be breaking down a World War III prediction slash analysis. So for some context, there's been some recent events in Eastern Europe that may or may not lead to World War III, but we're going to be talking about that in today's video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. That really helps me out, and let's go ahead and get right into it. So as of recently, there's been a buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. Now this is not necessarily new news. We knew about this for a couple of weeks now, but it really kind of has gained some attention. There's estimated to be around 175,000 troops on the border, which, if you don't know, that's enough to invade. The US media hasn't really been covering this that much. There's been some posts online, but major news outlets really haven't been reporting on it. But it is kind of important to note that there is a buildup of troops on the Ukrainian border, and we might be seeing something similar to Crimea in 2014. Now, if you don't know about the Ukrainian situation, I suggest that you look into it for even more context on what could be happening here. But if you didn't know, in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, which is a small peninsula off the southern coast of Ukraine. Now, in 2014, the US and NATO didn't do anything about this, but it does seem like they are willing to do stuff about it now in 2021. And US intelligence kind of predict that this might take place, and with Russia making an invasion that will in fact take Kiev and pretty much all of over here in eastern Ukraine. Now this isn't 100% confirmed. This is according to US intelligence, so I wouldn't be worried about it. It's just kind of like a prediction, but I'd say there's some kind of good chance that there's going to be some military action that's going to take place. As of this video, US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin have already kind of talked on a video call, but as I'm recording this on Monday, they have not, so I'm not going to be able to include those results here. But in the meeting, there is plans to talk about Ukraine, and there's plans to tell Russia to kind of back down, so I'm not sure if that's actually going to achieve anything. Probably not. But once again, there is a buildup of Russian troops near Ukraine, so we might be seeing some military action early 2022. Now, if NATO does not get involved, then unfortunately we are going to see an invasion of Ukraine here, and it's probably not going to end too well for them. We would most likely see Russian forces push up from Crimea and take over the Ukrainian coast, and then obviously Russia would focus on the majority Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, so over here in eastern Ukraine, and a little bit up here in the north. But currently with the troop buildup and capability, it is estimated that Russia could possibly push as far as this into Ukraine, which would probably make them capitulate or surrender, which isn't good for Ukraine. Another estimate shows that Russia could possibly capture Kiev, which is the capital city of Ukraine. And overall, unfortunately, Ukraine would get slapped in this war. Now, both NATO and the EU have said there's going to be severe consequences for Russia invading Ukraine. It's most likely sanctions, which isn't really holding up to the deal with Ukraine, but it is possible that they could help out Ukraine in this war since Ukraine is a NATO partner. So what if NATO does get involved? We're most likely going to see the major NATO countries getting involved here, such as the United States, the UK, France, Germany, Poland, all those countries. And how NATO reacts to the situation is going to be a little bit weird because Ukraine isn't a NATO member, but they're a NATO partner. So maybe not every NATO country would get involved, since it's not necessarily the if someone attacks this, then everyone else gets involved. But let's say that Belarus goes ahead and joins in on Russia's side and declares war on Ukraine and these other NATO members. That would in fact activate all of NATO. So now Russia's at war with pretty much all of Europe. Obviously this isn't good for them because statistically Russia would not be able to beat NATO. Now they could pull out some kind of secret weapon and absolutely destroy NATO. I don't know. I'm not like in the Russian government. I don't know what they have. But based on current knowledge of Russian capability, they wouldn't be able to beat NATO. Now besides Russia and NATO here, each of the teams are going to have their own allies. So Russia's going to have Belarus most likely, and NATO is going to have some other European countries, such as Ukraine, obviously, and most likely Georgia. And Azerbaijan might join in. I know that they're very pro-Turkey. Kazakhstan would most likely join in on Russia's side. And when it comes to Central Asia, it's kind of like a mixed thing. I know Russia has like some kind of protection plan with all these countries, but I'm not really sure if they would join in this war, mostly because, one, they probably wouldn't contribute too much, and two, what would they gain out of it? So possible Russian allies are going to be represented by the color of this dark purple, and possible NATO allies are going to be represented by this darker blue. So if this war were to break out, it wouldn't really be like a major world conflict. I mean, this would be a huge conflict. It would have a lot of casualties, but it may not truly amass to a full global conflict. Just coloring some more possible allies for each team, we have the inclusion of Finland in on NATO side. Now, this is kind of depending on the war situation. Finland likes Estonia, they're good allies in real life, so they would possibly join in on the side of NATO just to kind of protect their ally, or they might just join in because they hate Russia. We also have the inclusion of another member state of NATO, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina. They are currently a NATO partner. They kind of want to join NATO, but due to political affairs, they really can't. Now, the big elephant in the room is obviously going to be China here. I don't see them getting involved in this war. China and Russia do hold some sort of relations, but it's not necessarily that they're allies. It's more that they're just sharing a common enemy. Now, during the US's distractions in Europe, we could see China invade Taiwan. Now, this would make the conflict very global. Now, another way World War III could start is if China were to invade Taiwan, but that is not as likely as a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as we're seeing evidence that they are planning a sort of invasion. Now, they've denied that, which they might be lying. I mean, why else would you be building up troops near their border? Anyway, China and Taiwan. One of two things will happen here. China will invade Taiwan, no one gets involved, or China invades Taiwan and a lot of things happen. Now, the most likely scenario is China takes Taiwan and nothing happens. But let's just take a look at a second scenario just to kind of escalate things and take a broader view of it. So with this, we have South Korea and Japan joining the war in order to counteract China. We also have the Philippines joining in order to kind of protect their Western Sea. And because China and the Philippines don't have the best relations. So the Philippines would most likely take this scenario in order to counteract China. Now with this, North Korea would join in on the side of China just to invade South Korea. And China might be able to get Mongolia to join in on their side, although I'm not really sure what they would contribute to this. So right away, we have another part of the world in conflict here. We have the main war over here in Europe, but we also have this one between China and East Asia. Now the reason I didn't color in Australia and New Zealand earlier is because of this scenario in particular. Australia and New Zealand would most indefinitely be a NATO ally, but when it comes to this war, we know Australia is building up in order to counteract China. So let's just go ahead and put them on the yellow side here. So we can see here that this is escalating, and yeah. Now what would the United States do about this? That is a good question, and the most likely scenario if China does in fact invade Taiwan and South Korea and Japan get involved is that the USA will join the war on the side of the yellow team, which would by default put each yellow and green team member on their respective sides. So now we have World War III in a global conflict. Now this is taking it to an extreme extent. Like I said, the possibility of anyone getting involved in the Chinese invasion of Taiwan is pretty low, but this isn't in the realm of impossibility. This is in the realm of possibility. So I think it's important that we take into account things like this just so we can be sure and or be ready. So with this, we're going to have some domino effects over here in Southeast Asia. Pakistan is an ally of China, so they would most likely join in on the war. Now India would most likely join the war on the side of NATO, but I'm not going to be putting them in fully because I think that they hold good relations with Russia, but they also hate Pakistan and China. So it's like, do you go against your friend in order to kill two enemies, or do you just stay out of it? It's an odd scenario that India is in, but I think it's more likely that they would join in on the blue side. Speaking of which, we have the possibility of Myanmar joining in on the side of the red team, as well as Cambodia and Laos, and the possibility of Vietnam joining in on NATO's side. So that is the possible inclusion for Southeast Asia. Not likely that any of these countries would join in just because of their economies, but Vietnam might join in. They're doing okay. Heading over to the Middle East, this is going to be a real fun one, but I think it's safe to say Iran would join in on the red side. Now, once again, the purple color is like possibly, not 100% joining in. Moving over to that, we also have the inclusion of Iraq and Syria. This is a given. With the possibility of Iran joining in on the red side, we have the possibility of Saudi Arabia joining in on the blue side. That also includes Kuwait. And we all know that Israel is an ally of the United States, so they would join in on the blue side. Egypt might get involved. They might not. So I'm going to put them as a pure purple just because they can join either side. Lebanon would most likely join in on the purple side, as well as Palestine. Now, I know pretty much nothing about Jordan, so I'm going to be putting them on the almost blue side because pressure between Israel and Saudi Arabia to join in because, you know, supply lines. Jordan did fight a war against Israel though, as well as Egypt, so maybe not. Armenia could possibly join in on the red side. Unlikely, but maybe. And yeah, this is about the full extent that World War III would happen. Maybe we could see some South American countries getting involved if this like really escalates a lot. But it escalating this far is probably unlikely, but not impossible, so we need to keep that in mind. Now, with all these countries getting involved, we do have to remember that that is only happening because China joined in on the war. I doubt that any of these countries would get involved if it was only Russia and Belarus and Kazakhstan. So zooming all the way out, we can see this is my prediction for the full extent of World War III. I don't think this is going to happen. This is just what I think would happen if it were to escalate this bad. So going back to my actual prediction here, this is what I think will happen if Russia invades Ukraine and NATO responds. This is the most likely scenario that we'll see. You could say this is a global conflict, but it's mostly a bunch of countries on the blue team and like only 3 countries on the red team. So is it really a world war? I'm not sure. We might just refer to it as the Russia-NATO conflict, or maybe the Russian-Ukrainian war on a broader scale. I don't know what we would refer to this conflict as, but it probably wouldn't be called World War III just because of the lack of involvement on the red team. I have made some changes here for NATO here. We have the full inclusion of Australia and New Zealand. This is new to the new pact signed between the UK, the USA, and Australia. They made a new defensive pact a couple months ago. And then New Zealand would obviously join because It's New Zealand. Why wouldn't they? I got rid of the possibility of Bosnia and Herzegovina joining because they most likely would not. I did the same thing with Azerbaijan. Unless Turkey is getting invaded by Russia, they probably won't join in. But I am going to be keeping Finland as a likely NATO ally. Going over to East Asia, I did include Japan as a likely NATO ally because Russia has been setting up missiles all over these islands and places over here recently. So why else would they be doing that if they weren't, like, I don't know, I just think that some of these things are super obvious to some people look over. Like, Russia does anticipate that if they invade Ukraine, then NATO will respond, and we could likely see Japan respond too. So they're taking the precautions of that, and pretty obvious to me. It could also just be a show of power. That's likely as well. So that's my prediction for what happens if NATO does retaliate against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, that's even if that does happen. There isn't a 100% chance that Russia's going to invade Ukraine. They could just be doing this for a show of power, which is likely. I just think it's odd that they're kind of preparing for it, so maybe this will happen. So in the comments, I want you guys to tell me what you would change about this scenario, or what you agree with, or what you disagree with, or just what your own scenario would look like. Now, I'm standing by my scenario pretty solidly here. This is pretty likely, like I've said many times. So yeah, that's been my prediction about World War III. Make sure to leave your comments regarding this scenario, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you're new. We're really close to 20K, and it would be awesome if we were to hit that. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.